Hi everybody and welcome to Heel Heat. My name is George Coles, and on this episode we're doing It Came From the Network. The topic of this It Came From the Network, Baywatch, Season 6, Episode 15, also known as Bash at the Beach. And the reason for this, if you may not have noticed by the title, this was a WCW integration into Baywatch, kind of a cross promotion here. There are a couple things I want to mention up front. Normally, when I review videos for It Came From the Network, they're from Peacock. So Peacock does have Baywatch there, but it doesn't have this season, because I wanted to do this because it was something that just popped back into my memory. I may have seen a picture or something, so I had to go to Amazon Prime, and lo and behold, Amazon Prime Video has this. So I got this episode off of Prime Video, not the normal source. That being said, normally I rate everything match by match on a 1 to 5 scale. For this, I'm going to rank the entirety of the show as a whole, just because although there are matches on the show, there's not really a match breakdown on the show. With that being said, let's jump right into it. We get to open, we see Hulk Hogan and Macho Man Randy Savage. They're having a race on jet skis and kind of talking trash back and forth. Hogan gets distracted by some girls, tries to show off, stands up on top of his jet ski and ends up falling off of the jet ski and getting hit in the head by the jet ski, so Hogan's unconscious in the water. That brings us to CJ, the lifeguard, played by Pamela Anderson, notices this, goes swimming out to him, followed by Caroline, who was played by Yasmin Bleeth. And I may be the only one, but let me know in the comments this. Every time I hear the word Caroline, or the name Caroline, it instantly makes me think of Outcast and Roses with Caroline, Caroline. I don't know why. I mean, obviously it's a great song. I digress. The Baywatch girls get Hogan back on the shore, give him CPR to revive him. Basically, he does a have I made it to heaven thing. Macho Man comes up, starts arguing with why did Hulk leave him? Hogan says, why did you leave me? That's never resolved, by the way. So we get our open, we get the main story, or the beginnings of the main story. Then we go to our side story. We get Mitch Buchanan, who was played by David Hasselhoff, and Stephanie, I forget what I think it was Holden was the last name. And yes, I used to watch Baywatch every week, so I do remember all of these characters very fondly, let's say. Stephanie's in there. They're talking about a date that Stephanie's about to go on with Tom, and it kind of got the vibe of the love triangle, and I didn't really remember because there were a few times where Mitch and Stephanie were actually dating during the show, and I didn't remember if there was a love triangle vibe or a love triangle storyline here, but I definitely got the vibe from all of Mitch and Stephanie's interactions that there was some unrequited love there. We go to the date, which is a picnic on the beach, and just to prove that this is well dated and in the middle of the 90s, Tom, who's a doctor, a skincare doctor, he gets paged. And for you kids that don't know what paged means, we used to have these things called beepers or pagers. They were about yay big. You would clip them into your pocket or on your belt, kind of in a similar way that you would have a cell phone now. And you would hear this noise, a beep would go off, hence the beeper, and you would see a phone number. And basically what that meant was somebody wants you to call them back, so you would have to go to a payphone or a landline phone and call them back. I know, a lot of a side story for just a simple thing, but I love seeing old technology like that that's now phased out. It gives you that warm feeling, like seeing that, seeing VHSs, seeing cassette players, stuff of that nature that's no longer used, but stuff that was very essential to our lives at that time. They continue to talk after the page. He basically says, I have to leave, but he does notice as he's leaving there's a mole on the back of one of Stephanie's legs, so he tells her, you need to come into the office so I could check that out for you, which is going to be the B story going through here. They're kind of alternate back and forth between the two stories, the WCW story and the Stephanie Mole story. We go back to Hulk Hogan, who's talking to CJ, and CJ says to him, you know, they're working on a project for the youth center that's owned by Sonny that's been sold, and they're threatening to tear it down. And they go over to the youth center, which is basically the gym on Venice Beach, or I think it's a gym on Venice Beach. It looks like the gym on Venice Beach that I've seen 100 times in wrestling videos and on different media. While we're there, we see the first instance of David Chokache's character, Cody, who was the male equivalent to CJ being Pam Anderson, being the one that all the little boys went after or were crazy about. Cody, David Chokache, was the guy on the other side. He was a beautiful, beautiful man. We see them working out with Hulk Hogan and Randy Savage. After that, we click back to Stephanie and Mitch talking about possible skin cancer. She requests to stay in the office all day. A little bit on the overdramatic side here, but again, you could feel the tension between the two, even though Stephanie's with Mitch's best friend. Kind of a will they, won't they type thing. That's followed up. We get to find out who the developers are, the people that bought this. And this may be the most unbelievable part of the story. The buyer is Ric Flair. And if you know anything about Ric Flair, you know he's irresponsible with money. He has Kevin Sullivan as the Taskmaster and Big Van Vader with him. And basically this sets up the premise that they're going to tear the rec center or the youth center down. But if Hogan and Savage in 2 matches can beat Ric Flair and Van Vader, they'll get the deed. Why they would do that, I have no idea. The best part of this is we see Vader grabs a basketball from a little kid and squishes the basketball to pop the air out of it. So that sets up for the 2 matches that we're going to see later in the show. Then we go back to Mitch, who has Tom, his best friend, Caroline's boyfriend, at his house, and they're talking about what's going on with Caroline. And first Tom goes, "I can't tell you, Mitch, you know this." And then almost immediately he breaks HIPAA. And for those of you that have worked in healthcare or know anything about healthcare, it's a very big violation for someone in a doctor's role or any role to disclose other patients' medical histories to anyone that's not approved. Tom does it right here. I mean, I understand that we're talking about a girl that they both love, but still, in real life, this isn't going to happen. Or maybe it does happen, I don't know, but I don't think most doctors break the HIPAA rules like this casually. After that, we go to a scene where Stephanie's talking to Caroline about the sunscreen she's about to use, and basically tells Caroline is Stephanie's sister, if you're not familiar with the show, about the diagnosis. Kind of had a few little moments here that were obviously made for the general Baywatch audience, where you see Caroline applying lotion to her legs. Again, Caroline, very beautiful. All the women on the show are beautiful. All the men on the show are stunning looking. And again, much like the beeper, for those of you too young to remember this age, the internet was around, but it wasn't what it was nowadays. It would take minutes for a page to load with just a picture. So watching videos over the internet was very, very rudimentary. I believe there was some, but it was not great quality. So the reason a lot of people watch Baywatch is we didn't have Pornhub. It's just that simple. We didn't have access to pushing a button and anything you want to see in the history of the world being there. So we would watch shows like Baywatch for that kind of enjoyment, if you get my drift. Going back to the story, we see Hogan and CJ are talking again. There's some kids playing out on some rocks. The one kid slips, gets trapped in between the rock structure that they're standing on, so Hogan and CJ swim out. CJ can't get the rock off, so Hogan says, "Look out, I'm gonna do it," and Hogan lifts the rock with his ultimate Hulkamania power, which again, ridiculous, but it's part of the show. That's followed up by we see Stephanie back in her gear, going around the beach, talking to different people on the beach, telling them that they need to put on more sunscreen, that the sunscreen they have isn't good enough, or baby oil is not meant to be a sunscreen, it's going to do more damage than good. Basically lecturing people because of her situation and what she just found out. That's followed up with her and Caroline at their home, kind of talking about the day and her just wanting to know what the situation is, which immediately leads to Tom coming. Tom comes in the room, tells Caroline and Stephanie, well, definitely Stephanie, it's about her. Tell Stephanie that it is cancer. We got it quick enough and it didn't spread. It's a 95% success rate or survival rate. After that, we get treated to a montage of basically Hogan and Savage and the kids working out and running and all of that fun stuff. You know what a montage is. You've seen them all before. It's set to very generic rock music. Then we go to another scene with Mitch and Stephanie, basically talking about when they used to date, how Mitch promised that he would always be by her side and he would never let anything bad happen to her, which Mitch says, "You know I can't do that now as much as I want to," and blah blah blah. Again, feels like a love triangle. I don't remember if storyline-wise it became a love triangle later. I want to say I think she married Tom. I'm not 100% sure. We're talking about basically a cheesy show from 30 years ago, so I do apologize if I'm wrong on that. After that, we get what looks to be like a radio show where both the faces and the heels do some promos on each other, which was kind of cool. I did dig that. Then we go into highlights for Randy Savage versus Ric Flair, and I believe these are all from Bash at the Beach 1995, even though this aired in 96. Which that's another thing I want to talk about here. Vader was already out of the company by the time this happened, and he's being positioned as one of their big stars, which he was when he was there. I digress. We have the video of Savage and Flair. It's over edited where there's sound effects added in, a lot of grunting and punching and kicking sounds. Ultimately, Savage won that match, which means that they're 1 out of 2. They just need Hogan to win. But here comes a surprise. It's going to be a cage match. Because earlier in the show, Flair and Sullivan talked about Hogan being too fast for Vader. Let that sink in for a moment, because at no point did I think of Hogan as faster than Vader or being a fast wrestler. So they were going to sneak in the cage match, which Hogan notices. Flair tells him, "It's too late, big man. It's time for you to go out there." So we go into highlights for Hogan versus Vader in the cage. The funny thing is, Hogan is being escorted to the ring by Dennis Rodman, who they look like they try to edit out of this. I have no idea why. Maybe his managers didn't want to allow him on Baywatch, or maybe he wasn't there to do the acting portions of it, so they didn't want to make reference to him, but you could definitely see him coming out with Hogan. As you may have guessed it, Hogan beats Vader. We get to the back, the faces and the heels are talking with each other. All is well. Savage rips the deed out of Flair's hand, and they basically give the deed back to Sonny so he could keep running the youth center, which that's another thing. They did mention that Sonny was the reason that Hawk wasn't in the streets and in gangs, even though Hawk's from Florida. Savage said the same thing, even though Savage is from Indiana, I think, but he was billed from Florida. I digress. So that A story ends on a good note. The B story, we have Mitch and Stephanie are sitting there talking with each other. Tom comes up. You could tell by the look on his face, the cancer is spread. So we go off the air with a cliffhanger, with Stephanie having cancer. The melanoma had spread. So we get a little bit of a high note, followed up by a bad note, which was kind of surprising, because even though Baywatch did touch on some of these subjects, it's not a show that's really remembered as being overly negative or having stuff of this that wasn't resolved within the 30-minute or hour time limit. I think it was an hour time limit that they had. It was usually an issue of the week that would be finished by the end of that week. I digress. Overall, going into the show, I was thinking to myself that this is going to be super cheesy and super corny, and at points it really was, but I did find myself being more invested in the stories, more invested in what was going on than I thought I was going to be, for a show that was mostly looked at as, let's be honest, softcore porn, just so you could watch women running in bikinis in slow motion, or men running in bikinis in slow motion, if that was your thing. I felt like there was a lot better investment on my part watching the show than I thought there was going to be. I feel like the cornier parts of the show were the parts that WCW was in. And if you remember, 1995, early 96 WCW was a little bit on the corny side. I did enjoy the quick switches between the two A and B stories, and you never felt like they lingered on one story too long. It kept your interest. They kept going back and forth. I would have liked to have seen the WCW wrestlers be involved with Mitch and Stephanie at some point, because Mitch and Stephanie were basically the two leaders of the Baywatch lifeguard. I get why CJ was the one that Hulk Hogan interacted with, because obviously Pam Anderson was the biggest star of the show at the time. All in all, I did like this a lot more than I thought I would, and I might just go back and watch more Baywatch because of this. I thought it was a really good show. I'm going to give this one a 4. I thought it was really good and definitely worth watching, especially for those of all that may have nostalgic feelings for WCW, Baywatch, David Hasselhoff, David Chokache, Pamela Anderson, Alexandria Paul, which was Stephanie. I don't know if I mentioned that she was Stephanie. Yasmin Blee. This was just fun. It's not going to be an Emmy Award-winning show, and it never was, but much like pro wrestling, it was a show that gave the fans what they wanted, so the marriage was right there and right where fans could enjoy it. Like I said, I really enjoyed this. I enjoyed it a lot more than I thought I was going to going back on this. I thought I was going to make fun of this more than I enjoyed it. And I ended up, the only things I could think were a little bit funny, Vader destroying the basketball, Flair being the buyer, aren't necessarily bad for the show or at the time. I would recommend checking this out, especially if you want to see some of your favorite wrestlers of the 90s in one of the biggest pop culture TV shows of the 90s. You definitely should check this out. With all that being said, if you made it to the end, let's smash that like button, share the video, subscribe if you haven't. All of that really helps out the channel and it really helps the algorithm. YouTube's been really weird as of lately. It doesn't seem to be promoting videos the same way it did even a month or 2 months ago. So if you would do that, it would definitely help me out. And there's also a join button where you can become a member. That would also help out the channel. Shout out to Chris, thank you for joining. If you made it to the end of this video, again, we're going to try and drum up some engagement to get the YouTube algorithm working again. Let me know who your favorite Baywatch character was. Was it CJ? Was it Caroline? Was it Mitch? Was it Cody? Was it, I forget what Nicole Eggert's name was on the show. Was it Stephanie? They're all great characters. Was it Hobie, Mitch's kid, who wasn't on the show at all? It's funny that I remember Hobie's name. I have no idea why. But anyway, let me know which of those are your favorite. With all that being said, my name is George Coles, and it's been another It Came From The Network.